Welcome to another special Iraq briefing on day 105 of the US Israeli war on Iran. What began as a decapitation strike against Iran's leadership has become a prolonged and costly regional war. When we last briefed you on day 40, a fragile ceasefire was taking hold. Iraq's airspace was reopening, and there was cautious hope that the worst escalation might be behind us. Since then, the hope has been tested again and again. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively shut down to normal shipping, with traffic reduced to a fraction of pre war levels. Iraq's oil exports, the lifeblood of the Iraqi state, have collapsed. Baghdad is printing more cash, scrambling for alternative export routes through Turkey and Syria, and trying to keep the lights on as summer temperatures rise. In recent days, the war has escalated again. Iran downed a U.S. Apache helicopter near Hormuz. The U.S. struck Iranian military sites, and Iran answered with attacks on U.S. facilities and regional partners. Meanwhile, President Trump has alternated between threatening more strikes and saying a deal is close at hand. Folks, I'm pleased to announce that a great settlement with Iran is at hand. In just a few days, it will be signed in Europe. Hallelujah. Alhamdulillah. Iran has yet to confirm whether they'll attend. And because history apparently hired a comedy writer, the World Cup kicked off this week here in North America, including venues across the United States, a country currently at war with Iran, while Iran is one of the competing teams. So, yes, welcome to the beautiful game. If we can get with the writer's room for just a second, can you just imagine, let's just picture this, that the US and Iran make it all the way to the final match? Amazing. Oh, wait. So Iraq is here too, but only after Iraq's star player Ayman Hussein was detained and questioned by CBP for 7 hours at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Come on. Nonetheless, for Iraqis, the return of the Lions of Mesopotamia to the World Cup for the first time in 40 years is an incredible source of unity, pride, and joy. But unfortunately, we're not here to talk about soccer. Today, we're asking, after 105 days, how is the war impacting Iraq right now? And how much more pressure can Iraq absorb if this conflict drags on through the summer? I'm Erik Gustafson with Enabling Peace in Iraq Center. I'm joined by my colleague, Omar Al-Nidawi, editor of the weekly Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, or ISHM, which you can subscribe to at enablingpeace.org. So, Omar, how does it feel to have the Lions here on American soil?
It's confusing. Watching Iraq qualify for the 1986 World Cup in Mexico was probably my first soccer memory ever. And for the next 30 years, I was closely watching every qualifier, hoping that they would make it again until I gave up. And then I'd blink for a second and then they'd make it. So,
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, and also in 1986, that was also in the midst of a war, the Iran-Iraq War.
yeah. And I remember actually the last game in the qualifiers that actually let Iraq join the World Cup. And it was only 16 teams at the time, by the way. It was a match against Syria, and we beat Syria. I don't remember the exact result, but we beat Syria, which was both a sporting accomplishment, but also a geopolitical big deal at the time because Syria was at that time on Iran's side during the Iran-Iraq War.
Wow, wow. So yeah, like kind of beating the enemy, so to
Yeah,
speak. Yes.
yeah, it was like, the bad side of the Ba'ath Party
Y-
being,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So let's start with the big picture. Since our last briefing on day 40, what has changed most in Iraq?
I think what has changed most is that reality has actually set in. If you recall back when the war just started, we are talking about, oh, in probably 3, 4 months, Iraq is going to run out of money. Well, it's been 3, 4 months. And Iraq is running out of money. Oil exports have really collapsed. The country was exporting 3.5 million barrels per day before the war. In March, that dropped to 600,000 barrels per day. In April, that dropped further to just over 300,000 barrels per day. And in May, it dropped to just over 250,000 barrels per day. So that's like about 7%, 6% of what the oil exports were. And even as oil prices have gone up, if you're exporting just a tiny fraction of what you used to, it's not going to make ends meet. So this is a really catastrophic state for Iraq because the country depends, 90% of government spending comes from oil money. So if you don't bring in money from oil exports, you can't pay salaries, and the system just starts to break down.
And so, I mean, here we hear about shipping traffic is down because the strait is closed, more or less. It sounds a bit abstract, but in Iraq, which depends on those shipping lanes, that means that there's not money to pay salaries, to keep ministries operating, to support basic services. All of that is being challenged right now. So Baghdad has announced plans to raise exports through Turkey and Syria. How realistic are those plans?
Well, the plans would plug some of the gap, but not all of it. And they are meeting obstacles right away. Baghdad has announced a plan to more than triple the exports, almost quadruple the exports from the north, to bring them up to 770,000 barrels per day by August, and also to increase exports from Syria through Syria to over 400,000 barrels per day. Announcing these plans also exposed the lack of proper planning because just now the Iraqi government has told the oil ministry, oh, go ahead and sign agreements with Syria for the transition, storage, and offloading of Iraqi crude. You'd think that this would have happened on week one or week two of this crisis, but no, this is just starting to happen now that the oil ministry is talking to the Syrians about it. So there's a lot of delay in getting the crude trade out. There's some fuel oil that's going through Syria. Iraq was prioritizing that because it helps move fuel oil out of refineries to keep the refineries going. But it's a trade that has a lot of downsides. It's very expensive, it's slow, and has really a lot of also environmental risk. Just last week, there was an incident in which two tankers collided and they were spilling fuel oil over farmlands in somewhere in Syria. So it's a nasty business. When it comes to the northern exports, the issue is also slowed down by the demands of the oil companies, which have some legitimate demands. They are owed money. They have export oil in the past for which they have not been paid yet. So there are arrears that they demand. And they want clarity on future payments. And I think the hardest demand of all is that they want hard guarantees that they are not going to be attacked, that militias are not going to lob rockets and drones at their facilities, at their staff, at their crew members who are working in the fields of the Kurdistani region, which has happened frequently in the past. On top of that, there is an international issue here, which is that the treaty that governs the use of the Iraq-Turkey pipeline, through which the exports will pass, is set to expire in July. And Turkey has raised demands in the past for how it wants to renegotiate the treaty to improve the terms for Turkey in terms of transit fees, in terms of realizing the full capacity of the pipeline so that it becomes more feasible financially. So there are a lot of pieces that need to come in place before Baghdad gets to realize this plan. Again, we'd only need about a third of what Baghdad used to export prior to this conflict.
Wow. So really, it's like it's yet another cliff that Iraq could fall off around like July 27th if that agreement isn't renewed for the to be able to ship oil through Turkey to the Mediterranean, and then the strait could still be closed. So not
Right,
not
right,
good.
right.
So you were talking earlier, Iraq, the government is running out of money. What is the government doing to mitigate this crisis?
Well, it's printing money. According to a government advisor, this has been happening, and the foreign minister Fawad Hussein recently exposed the level at which this is happening. He said that the government has basically raised the ceiling for cash supply by 25% from 100 trillion Iraqi dinars to 125 trillion Iraqi dinars. The central bank issued a kind of a weak response saying, we control this process very carefully. We make sure that this is not going to lead to a deterioration in the exchange rate. And this is a very delicate process. Didn't exactly deny that printing is happening, but it's denied that the process is going to be destabilizing and gave assurances that we're still above we haven't reached the danger zone yet in terms of printing. But if you print money, if you keep printing money, obviously you're going to have inflation. You're going to increase the supply of cash. The prices of goods are going to increase, and exchange rate is going to be destabilized, and that's not going to be sustainable. And things are approaching fast. This is not a long-term horizon for that. It's happening within weeks.
Yeah, I mean, a short gap measure for sure. With Baghdad under financial pressure, how is the Kurdistan region managing? Is Baghdad continuing to pay salaries for Kurdish workers?
Well, the last payment that Baghdad issued was a month ago, and it seems that this month's payment is up in the air. It may or may not happen. There has been pressure from certain groups within Iraq's parliament, especially Atlab al-Haq, represented by Deputy Speaker of Parliament Adnan Fayhan, who said Baghdad should not be making any further payments to the KRG. The KRG has not kept its end of the bargain. They had promised or agreed to pay Baghdad a certain, or to make a remittance of the non-oil revenue that is generated within the Kurdistan region. And the KRG kept negotiating down that amount, and that's violating the budget law and existing agreements, and they're defaulting on these obligations. Therefore, Baghdad should not be making any new payments. And if it does, then it could be exposed to parliamentary action. Like he's threatening to take legal action, legislative action to stop the government from doing this.
So we've seen in the past how salary delays have sparked protests and created instability in the Kurdistan region. And nearly 20 months after the Kurdistan region's parliamentary elections, Erbil still does not have a fully formed government in place to manage exactly that kind of a crisis. So let's shift to the full picture of the region and the rest of Iraq. I mean, summer is coming. Summer is here. It's actually going to be 170 degrees out here in Fairfax County, Virginia, and temperatures in Iraq, you can imagine. So how is Iraq going to deal with the rising electricity demand that comes with the summer?
I know, for a lot of people, especially in pop culture, winter is coming is a scary announcement, right? But
Yes, yeah, yeah,
summer is coming is scarier about that.
yes.
Um, the electricity situation, I think, is quite bad, and the next crisis is probably going to be severe. You have multiple things going wrong. First, that because you're producing a lot less oil than before the war, you're also producing a lot less gas. Most of Iraq's gas production depends on associated gas, which comes to the surface with the oil. When you stop pumping oil, you lose that gas. You also lose some of the gas that comes from Iran. Iran is not sending all the amount that Iraq is asking for. And then you have delays in some of the projects that were intended to meet the rising demand for gas for power generation. Iraq had, and we talked about this in a previous video, Iraq has been planning to install a floating platform to import LNG, and that platform was supposed to be delivered in June. It's going to be delayed for at least 9 months because, well, you cannot really pass through the strait and to bring the platform in and build the infrastructure that is needed is just not possible. Power generation is going to suffer. It's already suffered. This week, the Ministry of Electricity said that current power output is about 20 gigawatts, and they're expecting demand to rise to 62 gigawatts this summer. So the gap is really more than it's close to 70%, which means that blackouts are going to be pretty bad, and they're going to be widespread. And that is not a good situation when you have temperatures soaring to 120 degrees Fahrenheit regularly.
Yeah, not just inconveniences, true, like genuine dangers. For
Exactly.
anyone who's spent time in Iraq, whether it's, Erbil or Baghdad, when the power cuts off and if the generator doesn't start up, you can feel a wall of heat just pass over the room. I have felt that.
It's
So
instant.
it's
Yeah.
instant. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, we've got salary potential and increasingly a problem with salary delays, inflation, because that's what happens when you print money. And, then shortages of electricity, not good. So uh, speaking of who's supposed to be handling all those challenges, the government. So turning to the government formation, weren't they supposed to fill those vacant posts, those major vacant posts in key ministries after Eid? Where does that stand?
Yeah, this has not happened yet. The government continues to be incomplete. There are 9 portfolios that are vacant. They're run by temporary, appointments. There are still, I think, critically, there are no ministers for defense or interior, the two most important security ministries in Iraq, and two vital ones, especially at times of conflict. Negotiations between the political blocs are delayed and prolonged by disputes about who gets what, and also by the U.S. demands to exclude the militia-linked actors from government. So Washington demands are putting pressure on relations. Prime Minister Zaidi is planning to come to D.C. Not exactly clear when he's coming, but he's announced that he plans to come to Washington. He wants to bring in a large delegation of Iraqi business representatives. So seems that he wants a relationship that's built on economic ties and trade and business cooperation. That seems to be his focus. And but he also has to manage the coordination framework. His partners, his employers, really, the militia-linked parties and the Iranian pressure that's applied on his government during this amid this conflict.
And you mentioned the militias. So there was this announcement that the militias are disarming. You, of course, have a great piece at the Stimson Center that everybody can check out. We'll include a link in the show notes. So, based on these announcements in recent days and what hardline groups, some of the hardline militias are saying and the threats that they're making, where do things stand right now?
We had 3 groups that announced their intent to integrate themselves into state institutions or put themselves under state control. They have used very different and very vague language, sometimes conflicting language to describe what they try to do. So, for whatever it's worth, it's there. The government has formed a committee to try and manage this process, and they announced this week that they have started receiving records about the personnel, equipment, and weapons of these groups. How much is that worth? It's unclear. That's information that should be in the possession of the government to begin with. But in any case, it does reflect a tendency to normalize relations between the government and these militias and to address or assuage Washington's concerns about the militias and their role in government. But at the same time, you have hardline militias that are completely not buying this. Kitab Hezbollah, Kitab Sayyid al-Shayna, Harakat Hezbollah and Najaba, and they have rejected any calls to disarmament. They said, don't give your heavy weapons to the government. We'll buy them from you. Um, but whatever, between these two different visions or two different attitudes, I think what matters is what does disarmament mean? If command structures and loyalty outside the formal change of command continues, then handing over some weapons doesn't really do anything to solve the underlying problems.
Yeah, yeah, precisely, precisely. I heard an expression recently by Aaron David Miller. He was, of course, describing negotiations between Iran and the U.S. But this idea of, you can have memorandums of understanding and you can have memorandums of misunderstandings. And very
That's a
much
good one.
like what you're describing is like it's important that they are memorandums of understanding and sustained follow through, of course, is crucial for that any process of disarmament and significant change in terms of the social order in Iraq, the political order in Iraq.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so, we've been painting a very grim picture. So I'm gonna get up on that hill and on the cross and start singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." I don't know if you any Monty Python fans out there, Life of Brian. So give us a silver lining. Is there any silver lining in all of the pressure that Iraq is under right now?
There are few. At least Iraq is not going to go thirsty this summer. Water conditions are okay. There's been a lot of rainfall and snow melt earlier this year, so rivers are flowing well, dams and reservoirs are filling. So the water reserves that Iraq has right now are like 4 or 5 times what they were last year this time. So the water condition is going to be okay. Agriculture, drinking water should be secure. But of course, this does not solve the long-term, impact of climate change that Iraq is dealing with, and the long-term impact of mismanagement, wasteful usage of resources, and outdated techniques. All of that is not going to be solved just by some good rain in one season. That requires a lot of work. Another possible silver lining is that the revenue crunch that Iraq is dealing with is pushing Prime Minister Zaidi and his government to improve relations and build bridges with Syria, with the new government in Syria. So Zaidi has dispatched his intelligence chief, who has been a regular envoy, I think, between Baghdad and Damascus, with a message expressing Baghdad's interest in building stronger security and economic ties. And I'm sure that was focused on the expansion of the oil trade through Syria to open new export routes for Baghdad and generate more revenue. So that's a good thing that Baghdad is trying to rebuild relations with its neighbors. So that could have long-term benefits, but those benefits will depend, of course, on whether the emergency measures will become and develop into real strategic policies.
Yeah, so that's encouraging in terms of the rainfall and agriculture in Iraq. But the way I think of it, do remember in terms of climate change, is it's kind of like you have this long-term trend of less water, higher temperatures that impact, but the dog might still walk back and forth along that line.
Mhm.
So you still occasionally have some better water years. So what's the outlook from here? What should we be watching over the next several weeks?
Okay, so I think July and August are going to be potentially very rough and destabilizing because we have several crises that are going to converge at once. You have the low oil exports, you have the shrinking revenue, potentially inability to pay salaries, you have the money printing situation with potential inflation and rising prices. Electricity shortages are going to be severe. I don't see how that's going to be avoided. You also have the political problems of the unresolved cabinet posts. You have the tensions with the militias, with the hardliner militias that are refusing the disarmament initiatives, and of course the Baghdad Erbil financial disputes and the negotiations with the oil companies. I think the combination of power outages and lack of money is going to be the thing to watch because it can create highly volatile conditions across Iraq. So I think possible outcomes could include delayed payments or default on payments, inflation from the printing of money, electricity protests, bread and butter protests. People go hungry and thirsty and hot, and that can trigger, I think, a lot of unrest. And you'll see more pressure, I think, on being applied on the Zaidi government from from various directions. The government could survive the immediate crisis if exports improve, or if there is dramatic increase in traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, through some sort of breakthrough between the U.S. and Iran. But if the war drags on, then Iraq's fiscal and social stability will be tested vigorously.
But thank you so much for all of that, Omar. If just a few quick closing thoughts, if there is one takeaway for day 105, it's this. This US Israeli war on Iran may be fought over nuclear negotiations in the Strait of Hormuz, but its consequences are landing hard in Iraq. Iraq's oil exports have collapsed. Its new government is managing a fiscal emergency before it's finished forming a cabinet. Its electricity system is heading into another brutal summer under extraordinary pressure. Baghdad's relations with the Kurdistan region and with Gulf neighbors are being tested. And armed groups inside Iraq continue to challenge the state's ability to decide questions of war and peace. Here at Epic, we believe that Iraqis deserve peace, sovereignty, and a chance to build a future not constantly disrupted by wars they did not choose. And yet, Iraqis also have something to celebrate. The Lions of Mesopotamia are back in the World Cup for the first time since 1986, with their first match against Norway this coming Tuesday, June 16th, at Boston Stadium. Whether you follow soccer or not, that matters, because Iraq's national team has often done what politics could not: bring people together across Iraq and the Kurdistan region, from Baghdad to Erbil, from Sinjar and the Nineveh Plains to the southern marshes, from Ramadi and Fallujah to Slemani, and throughout the diaspora. As Iraqis absorb the consequences of decisions made in Washington, Tehran, and Tel Aviv, we'll be rooting for the Lions of Mesopotamia as they take the world stage. You can follow our weekly Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, ISHM, at enablingpeace.org, where Omar, uh, you and the Epic team continue to follow these developments week by week. So please subscribe, share this briefing, cheer on the Lions, and stay engaged. Thank you so much for watching. Masalama.
Masalam.